white police officer, Officer Vanderbrook, sat at one side of the courtroom, and a black South African woman sat at the other side of the courtroom. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission said to the black South African woman, "This officer came to your township, went into your home, arrested your husband, brought him out to a party that he was having with other police officers, and they burned your husband to death. Then the year after that, they came to your home there in the township, and they grabbed your son, and they brought him out to a party also outside the township, where they burned him to death. Now, what do you want us to do with this police officer?" And the black South African woman said, "I have 3 requests. First of all, I want to be allowed to go back to the place that they burned my husband and son to death, and I want to be allowed to gather up the ashes of my husband and son and give them a proper burial. Secondly, I want Officer Vanderbrook to come to my house in the township once a month and allow me to mother him, because I got a lot of mothering left in me, and he took away my family. And thirdly, I want to be allowed to walk across this courtroom right now and to give Officer Vanderbrook a hug, to convince him that my forgiveness is real." And so this black South African woman stands up, walks across the courtroom, and as she's walking, someone starts singing "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see." And as she gets closer to Officer Vanderbrook, he faints dead away. Jesus told a parable in Matthew chapter 18 about an unmerciful servant. In Matthew 18, Peter comes up to Jesus and says, "Hey, Jesus, how many times should I forgive my brother when he sins against me? How many times should I forgive my sister when she sins against me? Up to 7 times? That's good, Peter. The Pharisees said you forgive 3 times and that's it." So Peter doubled it, added 1, said, 7 times. How about that, Jesus? And to his shock and amazement, Jesus said, "No, Peter, not 7 times, 70 times 7. And then he told a parable about a king who wanted to settle his accounts. And he called his servants in. And one servant came in who owed him millions of dollars in debt. He said, "I'm going to throw you into prison until you pay that debt." And the servant gets down on his knees and says, "Please be patient with me, and I'll pay the whole thing back." The king has mercy on that servant. He cancels the guy's debt and lets him go free. The servant walks out of the palace. He sees a fellow servant walking down the road. He says, "You owe me a few dollar debt. Pay now. Technically, you owe me." And his fellow servant got down and said, "Please be patient with me. I'll pay it all back." And the first servant says, "No, you owe me, pay now, or you go to prison." He couldn't pay, so the servant threw his fellow servant into prison. Well, some other servants saw this transaction. They ran to the king and they said, "Oh, king, you know the servant whose $1 million debt you canceled? Well, he just threw a guy in prison for a few dollar debt." The king was outraged. He called the servant back in. He said, "Let me get this straight. I canceled millions of dollars of debt of yours, and you just threw a guy in prison for a few dollars debt?" And the king was outraged. He said, "Throw this servant into prison." And then Jesus says some of the most scary words in the New Testament. He says, "This is how my Father will treat you unless you forgive your brother, your sister from your heart."